Hello and welcome to this episode of sMater, a podcast by clinicians for clinicians, brought to you by Mater, an Australian leader in healthcare for more than a century. My name's Gillian Whiting.
And I'm Catherine Cooper, Clinical Specialty Coordinator for Mothers, Babies and Women's Health at Mater.
And we're coming to you from Meanjin, the land on which this podcast is being recorded. Today we're joined by Sophie Ballinger, a Brisbane mum whose fourth child Xanthe was born preterm at Mater Mothers Hospital, South Brisbane in 2020, just as the country was going into COVID lockdown.
And today she's kindly joining us to share her story.
Mater.
Caring for the community for more than a century.
Innovators in health, education and research.
Home to world-class clinicians.
State-of-the-art facilities.
High-quality, patient-centered.
Australia's largest and leading
Turning
maternity.
scientific discoveries
Educating
into
the nurses,
life-changing
healthcare advancements,
Passion,
passion,
integrity.
We are Mater.
We are Mater.
We are Mater.
This is sMater.
Sophie, welcome to sMater.
Thank you.
Let's start at the 24-week scan, your routine scan. Mm-hmm. You head off. How are you feeling? What are your expectations at that point?
I'd say at that point, I think with all scans, you have an element of being nervous. But at 24 weeks, I just had a scan 4 weeks earlier for the 20-week scan. So I think I was feeling more excited than anything to see her again and wasn't really expecting any problems. So there was an element of nerves, but more sort of excitement and just thinking it was a scan to be cautious.
Yeah. And you've got other children as well.
So having 3 full-term pregnancies, for me, it just was a routine that everything would be fine.
So what point did you realise that everything wasn't fine, that there was maybe something wrong?
So it wasn't until the end of the scan. So they scanned Xanthe. She was fine. And then they checked my cervix. And at that point, the sonographer noticed that there was a shortening and it was dilating. I didn't know what that meant. But they said to me that I should go down to the pre-assessment unit. And so I hopped off the bed and then they said, "Oh, you're better to go in a wheelchair." And at that point I thought, okay, this is serious. And called my husband and went downstairs. Yeah.
So at that point you're told you're at risk of having a preterm birth. What was the conversation around that?
So I think when I got down to pre-assessment, they checked me out there and they explained to me that my cervix was dilating. It didn't really sink in. I still thought, well, I've had 3 normal pregnancies. They're being overly cautious. And then I thought maybe they'll just put a stitch in. It really didn't sink in that this was something that she would actually come early. And then it was only probably once they'd admitted me to the ward and then I saw so many different specialists and so many doctors that I think I then started to get really scared and nervous about what was happening.
Mm.
So from that scan to the birth, how long a period was that?
So I was in hospital for 5 days. I went in on the Monday. I think it was around the Wednesday or Thursday, they gave me steroids for Xanthe, which would help strengthen her lungs if she came early. That was something that I struggled with because I didn't really ever believe that this was going to happen. So I felt like I was being given these steroids that could potentially harm her or weren't needed because I just found it difficult to believe that she was going to come so early. Actually, it was probably that decision that saved her life and gave her the sort of stronger lungs that she was born with. And then I had so many doctors and nurses and midwives, social work that came to see me over that period of time to give me as much information as I could to prepare me for what was potentially going to happen. And
then when the decision is made, what was that like? So preparing for the birth itself?
Well, that never really happened for me. So they actually had said to me that I was most likely going to be discharged on the Friday. So that was what I was working towards. And because it was COVID, I couldn't see my children. They weren't allowed into hospital. So I was promising them that I'll be home by Friday. And actually Friday came and my bags were packed and I was ready to go. And then the doctor came and did another examination and said that my cervix had dilated more and that I needed to stay in. And then that was really frightening at that point because I thought this is actually going to be happening.
Sounds obviously quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
What would be the key clinical bits of information you would have wanted at that time?
See, I struggled with all the information then. It did feel a lot to take on. All I wanted to know was that she was going to be okay. And that's all I kept saying. And no one obviously could tell me that. I do remember they gave me a lot of information and they kept asking me if I wanted to know more. They asked me if I wanted to go and visit NICU so I could see where she would go if she came early. That's something that I declined because I was so scared about what I would see. And I was still believing that this wasn't going to happen. But they also provided me with some really good information about statistics for each week of what her prognosis could be if she came.
Was that written and verbal?
Yes, it was both. Yeah, I did struggle with the verbal to take it in. So the written was really helpful to go back on.
Weighing 860 grams, smaller than a 1 litre bottle of milk, Sophie's tiny miracle, Xanthe, was delivered by caesarean section at Mater Mothers Hospital on the 22nd of March 2020, a day before the global pandemic led Australia into its first nationwide shutdown. Xanthe was just 25 weeks gestation.
So take us to the birth. So Xanthe is born at that point. What happens then?
She came by C-section. So the neonatologists were in the room when she came. And as soon as she was born, they quickly took her and went to a room next door. And my husband was able to go with her. And she was immediately ventilated. And he was able to, I think he was even able to help with that. And he could be with her the whole time. But for me, I was separate and they had to sort of stabilise me and put me back together. So it was a few hours later before I was able to go and see her.
Were you prepared for what you saw when you got to see her? Had they had conversations about, or had you remembered the conversations about what to expect?
I don't think you can be prepared. As much as I knew she would be tiny, it was really, really overwhelming seeing her like that. I mean, she was so small, so vulnerable, so many wires on her. She didn't look like a baby at all. I couldn't really believe that she could be that tiny. So it was very, very frightening seeing her like that. And you feel this immediate love and then you're just so scared. It's so frightening.
So what was happening to her at that point through that process?
So she at this point she was in the incubator. She had tubes keeping her breathing. I think she was on full oxygen at that point. So she was totally on having breathing support. And it was just trying to keep her stable.
And over what period of time was that?
So she was in NICU and special care for 100 days. We were in hospital for 100 days. As the weeks went on, she got stronger and stronger. Her breathing support came down and things got easier. But it was the first 2 weeks that were incredibly difficult.
In those early days, those 2 weeks, we hear a lot about the importance of skin-to-skin contact. What put us in that position for you? What was that first moment like?
It was amazing holding her. It was really frightening. I think when you hold your baby for the first time, you're imagining this chubby, big baby where you just love them. And then holding Xanthe, she was tiny. It wasn't like holding a baby. It was really scary. Someone had to pass her to me, and then we had to make sure the wires were safe. And you have this huge love for them, but then you just feel, I was scared to love her because I didn't know if I was going to get to bring her home. So it was a very emotional.
An element of self-protection.
Yeah, very much. But also because so much research has been done on the importance of holding them, then I think it felt quite sort of empowering and you felt like you were giving something back and you felt like you feel so hopeless. You can't do anything. And so being able to hold her and know that was helping her really helped me sort of mentally as well and knew that I was doing something for her.
So we talk a lot in the clinical world, we talk a lot about patients being at the centre of decision making. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that was done or how you felt that could have been done or?
Yeah. So I think it was fabulous with Xanthe. I'd say the first week, I didn't know what was happening. I was numb. I think they tried to make me at the centre of decision making, but I was too scared to really listen or to ask questions, and I just had to really trust that she was in the right place. Then I'd say as she got stronger and as I got more confident and comfortable with where she was, then that was really helpful and sort of empowering as well. The neonatologist we had was fabulous. Every day he would come and find us and give us an update on how she was, talk us through the next steps. And if any reason we didn't see him, he would always call us. So the whole time I felt I knew what was happening. There was the odd occasion where I didn't know what was happening for whatever reason, or if we had new staff come on that hadn't looked after her before, then that was really quite stressful because you feel nervous. Do they know her? Do they understand her different needs? And that would cause a lot of anxiety. So it required a lot of trust from me to think, yes, they're okay and they've got this.
How do you think we could overcome that difficulty with new staff coming in?
Yeah. So there is a handover that they get. And so I think there's two things. So one is that I needed to trust the process more, but that's difficult to do. And I really liked it when the staff would come to me, and on the whole, they always would. They'd introduce themselves and say who they were. But then just to really listen when I would say, this is what she always does and this is how she behaves. And so it was a handover from me to the staff as well, not just staff to staff. And then I think you can feel that you are being listened to, and that any concerns that you have, they've clocked them and they're onto them.
That's a really valuable take for clinicians, that nobody knows that baby better than its mother. Trust and listen to the mother.
Yeah. And I think definitely after a couple of weeks in NICU, you do really know them by that point. And she would have her machine would start beeping. I think this is the one thing that really stressed me out when I was in there, is that as soon as her oxygen levels fell, her oxygen support was put up. And that really frightened me because I'd always been told that you don't want it too high. And so I would sit there nervous that they've just put the oxygen up and it shouldn't be up. And then I didn't want to be a difficult mum constantly saying, can you put the oxygen down? And so it was hard to know how much involvement you can have without being difficult and annoying.
Is there such a thing? I don't know.
There shouldn't
do you
be.
want to step in there?
You know what? I don't think you can ever judge a parent for being annoying or difficult when their child's welfare is at risk. You know, it might be with a busy clinician, it might be, I have so many other things to do, but actually it's about this is this parent's child and their concerns are legitimate. There's no annoying, there's no silly questions. We have to learn to listen to those concerns, which can be challenging in a really busy environment when you've got multiple pulls on your time.
And on the whole, we had amazing nurses. Like I clearly remember one nurse, and she spent hours just sitting with me and I was asking her questions, and she would repeat the same answers and really make sure that I understood it. And that's a standout day for me, where I know I went home. I went in that day feeling terrible, and I went home that day feeling so much better.
It's an interesting take. We talk so much about continuity of care in pregnancy, and actually to see that continuity of care is just as valid and necessary in the
And I know that's
care.
not just me. I know various mums I met in NICU, we would all struggle when it was a new nurse looking after her, even though they could be really experienced. You just didn't know if they understood her the way the other nurses had. So it was always a relief to know who was on, and that they'd had it before.
An Australian Institute of Health and Welfare analysis of national perinatal data found the median length of stay for babies born preterm in hospital and discharged home in 2021 was 7 days.
If we forward to day 100 and Xanthe's allowed to go home, what was that like?
Oh, that was wonderful. I mean, it was a fabulous day. I think as well, Xanthe had come right at the start of COVID. And so my 3 younger children hadn't got to meet her, and they were desperate to meet her. So it just felt like a huge reunion that everyone had been so excited about. And bringing her home that first time was was amazing.
I can imagine it'd be fantastic. How did the clinical team actually help you prepare for that moment and for going home?
Yeah, well, I'd say so. She started off in NICU, which is where she had a lot of support. And then eventually they sort of graduate to special care, where it becomes a lot more sort of parental support for her. So I was bathing her, changing her nappies and breastfeeding her. So by the time she came home, I really knew what I was doing with her. She was in a wonderful routine, more than my other children have been. She was fabulous. She also came home on 24-hour oxygen. So we had sort of learnings on how to do the oxygen with her as well. And by the time we got discharged, she had so many appointments booked in. So I didn't feel like I was going home without support. I knew that I could always bring her back and what to do, and she'd have all these follow-ups as well.
She's now 3?
Yeah.
How is she?
Oh, she's wonderful. She's really cheeky, really mischievous, a lot of love. You wouldn't know that she was prem. She is in charge of our family, that's without a doubt. She's got us all wrapped around her finger. She's got all my children's friends wrapped around her little finger. But yeah, she's doing so well. The only thing I'd say is that her speech is a little bit behind. But besides from that, she's just thriving.
Is there anything the clinical team could have done to prepare you for those early years?
I'd say having had children before, I felt quite comfortable with what I was doing. I definitely the first few weeks with her at home and being on the oxygen, that was new and getting used to that. But we did have the regular appointments once we came home. So I was constantly being reassured that things were on track and that she was doing as she should be, yeah.
So 3 years on, you're still involved with the team here at sMater and providing insights. Why have you made that decision to do that, and what's it like?
Because Xanthe has just done so well, and I owe the Mater her life, really. I mean, I remember when everyone says to me she's such a fighter and she's such a feisty little thing, but I know that if it wasn't for the help that the hospital had given her, then she wouldn't be here today. And I'm so grateful for everything that they've done, and I just really feel I want to give back as much as I can.
Sophie, would you mind elaborating on how you're involved at sMater?
Well, there's a research group that's going on at the moment that's looking at reducing premature births nationally across Australia. And I am part of the sMater team that has obstetricians and midwives in the group. So the research is looking at the risks of premature birth, one of them being your cervical length. And so it's a lot of awareness pieces, educating staff as well. And so I am sort of the consumer voice of how best to target materials for the consumer.
Imagine if you were in a really remote area. I wonder how things might have been different.
Yeah. I mean, I constantly say we're so lucky to live so close to this hospital, and that this is where she has had her care. And we got seen, and it got picked up when she did. Like, everything seemed to fall into place for her to get the right care when she needed it.
It's so wonderful having your take on things from the consumer take, Sophie. How important do you think it is for hospitals to have that consumer advisory and feedback in terms of our growing and learning?
Well, I think it's really important because every family has a different story and different experiences, and everybody needs a different line sort of taken with them. And so what helped me and what helped Xanthe is different to other people. And so I think it's really important to understand from as many people as possible so that you can give them that support. I know as much as Xanthe was really helped, then as a family, we were as well. I mean, there was times where I really was struggling and I had so much support in the hospital. So just knowing what each consumer is going through or each mom is going through is really helpful.
Any final advice for other families who might be going through what you and your family have been through? So I'd say in the weeks, if you were in the hospital and you're told that you may be having a premature baby, it's just to give yourself time to process it, not to jump ahead, not to think worst case scenario. I think Xanthe is proof that a baby can come so early and can go on to have a normal and healthy life.
And then again, once they're born, just to be as involved in the process as you feel that you can be at that time. I'd say it took me a few days to process what had happened. It is taking it one day at a time, and not going to worst case scenario, not thinking that this is terrible, trusting in the doctors because they were incredible, and just taking the support that's on offer and taking what you need.
Well, it's great to hear Xanthe is doing so well, and thank you for sharing your story with us, Sophie.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for our next series, which will focus on breast, ovarian and women's cancers.
See you next time on sMater.